This monument was built in honor of the souls of the 9 maiden telephone operators who perished in the line of duty at the Meoka post office in Karafuto. Karafuto was connected to the Soviet Union by the national border laid along the 50th parallel north. In August 1945, the border was unexpectedly attacked by Soviet armed forces, breaking 40 years of silence. As evacuation of the island residents began, war raged through the town of Meoka. Gunfire and explosions could be seen from the windows. In the face of certain danger, the telephone operators stayed at their switchboards until the very end. "Everyone, this is the end. Farewell, farewell." Leaving these final words, they took their lives with potassium cyanide. The date was August 20th, 5 days after the war ended. In 1968, the Showa Emperor and Empress of Japan visited this park. Hearing the tragic tale of the 9 maidens, tears came to their eyes and they bowed their heads deeply in prayer for the peaceful rest of those lost. This monument bears the inscription of the poetry later recited by the Emperor and Empress in honor of the 9 maidens. When Japan organized its first South Pole expedition in 1956, about 40 Sakhalin Huskies were selected and trained here at Wakkanai as sled dogs for 8 months. The dog-sled team performed admirably amidst the raging Antarctic blizzards. However, when the second winter expedition group scheduled to relieve them could not land due to bad weather, 15 dogs had to be left behind on the uninhabited Antarctic continent. Then, 1 year later, the miraculous survival of 2 littermates, Taro and Gyro, was confirmed. This news became a sensation around the globe, and would later even be dramatized in the motion picture Antarctica. This monument commemorates the history of this location, Wakkanai Park, as the sled dogs' training ground and gives praise to their distinguished service. Nishioka Sakan served as Wakkanai mayor from 1932 to 1947. During the period of turmoil that followed the Pacific War, he devoted all his efforts to rebuilding Wakkanai, which had completely lost its function as a point of contact with the former Sakhalin region. He left behind many achievements, including paving the road between Wakkanai Post Office and Cape Noshapu, and developing ports, including the construction of the Central Wharf. The Wakkanai Founding Centennial Tower is 80 meters tall and was built in July 1978 to commemorate both the 100th anniversary of the founding of Soya Village and the 30th anniversary of Wakkanai's designation as a city. The Wakkanai Northern Memorial Museum, which tells the story of the development, history and culture of the city, is located on the first and second floors. The first floor exhibition covers the expeditions of Rinzo Mamiya, who traveled to Karafuto and established that it was an island not connected to the Asian mainland, as well as the history of Wakkanai from prehistory to the present day. Materials relating to relations between Wakkanai and Karafuto are displayed on the second floor. Furthermore, the observatory at the top floor of the tower stands 240 m above sea level and offers a panoramic 360 degrees view of the vast Sarobetsu Plain to the south, Wakkanai City and Soya Port to the east, the islands of Rishiri and Rebun in the Sea of Japan to the west, and Sakhalin just visible to the north. Sarobetsu Wilderness, which spreads out in the Soya region of northern Hokkaido, is part of Rishiri-Rebun-Sarobetsu National Park. More than 100 types of wetland flowers bloom in the Primeval Flower Garden, and the Ezosukashi daylily flowers that bloom in early summer are famous. The Sarobetsu Wetland Center is an information center where you can learn about the Sarobetsu Wilderness. The wooden boardwalk that extends from here is approximately 1 kilometer in length. There are observation decks and rest decks along the way, allowing you to take your time and enjoy the nature of the national park. The exhibition room explains the origin of the Sarobetsu Wilderness, the structure of the wetland, and flora and fauna. The Sarobetsu Wetland has an area of 6,700 hectares, making it the third largest wetland in Japan. The section of high moors which developed are the largest such in Japan. The Sarobetsu Wetland was once a large lagoon, but sand dunes formed, cutting it off from the sea, beginning the formation of the wetlands. The wetland is partitioned off from the Sea of Japan on the western side by sand dunes, which run north to south. The Sarobetsu River came to enclose the wetland, which resulted in the development of a concentric layout with the high moor centered around Mount Maruyama consisting mostly of peat moss. Penki Marsh and Panki Marsh on the southern side are lagoon marshes, which were formed in the same process that formed the wetlands. Peat mining by tugboats expanded the area from the south to the east of the factory site in 1970, and reached 150 hectares in 30 years, mainly in the upper wetlands. This corresponds to about 16% of the total area of the high-rise wetland at the start of mining, and even now we can clearly see the mining site. The excavated peat residue and water were returned to the mining site by waterways. The area near the waterway is covered with deposits of residue, but the area away from the waterway still has a large open water surface. This pond is also a water surface created by peat mining, and its depth is about 3 meters. Restoration efforts are being made to restore wetland vegetation where open water remains. Peat dredged by dredger ships was pressure-fed via a pipeline to a plant, where it first went through a water flushing separator. A rotating drum was then used to separate the fiber, which became product raw material. The evacuation of Karafuto and the Kuriles refers to the events that took place during the Pacific theater of World War II as the Japanese population left these areas, to August 1945 in the northwest of the main islands of Japan. The evacuation started under the threat of Soviet invasion. As Japanese civilians evacuated Korea and Manchuria, they cleared out of the Karafuto and the Kurile Islands according to the terms of the Potsdam Declaration that the terms of the Cairo Declaration would be carried out, and Japanese sovereignty would be limited to the home islands and such minor islands as the Allies determined. The operation began with the crossing of the Horonai Japanese frontier river post and bombardment of the Handanzawa Japanese land frontier post in Shikuka district, as well as the advance to the north of Khotan, a powerful fortified district. Severe fighting with heavy losses on both sides continued for over a week, with Soviet troops breaking the Japanese defenses on August 18. The Soviets also landed their naval forces deep behind enemy front lines to aid their ground forces. According to some of the 6,000 refugees already evacuated from the area, Soviet forces carried out fierce naval bombardment and artillery strikes against civilians awaiting evacuation as well as Japanese installations in Meoka, Shikuka on August 10. Nearly 1,000 civilians were killed by machine gun fire in this attack. Telephone operators in the city decided not to evacuate, instead maintaining contact with Wakkanai and mainland Japan until the moment that Soviet forces destroyed the telephone and postal installations in the city. On August 20, after Japan's surrender, fearing that they would be raped by the invading Soviet troops, 9 of the 12 female operators poisoned themselves, 3 were saved by male colleagues. The survivors at the post office were treated well by the Soviets. On August 16, the Coast Guard Czarnitsa, for minesweepers, 2 transports, 6 gunboats and 19 torpedo boats landed in Port Toro with the 365th Separate Marine Battalion and 1 battalion of the 113th Infantry Brigade. The troops instantly engaged the Japanese in fierce battle and by morning of the next day had captured 4 populated areas and the port city. During the Soviet assault on Meoka, on August 20, a combined Marine Battalion and the 113th Infantry Brigade landed in Port Meoka. They were preceded by a group of scouts, landed secretly by a submarine, in the Meoka area to successfully complete their task. However, Japanese resistance was desperate, and the landing party had to fight fiercely. Japanese set one of the Coast Guard vessels on fire, to which the Soviet response was intense naval bombardment of the city, causing more civilian deaths. The rest of the Japanese Meoka defenders retreated between the mountains in the direction of Tiohara in order to make a last stand in the capital. On the 25th of August, another 1,600 men landed in Otomari, now Korsakov. The Japanese garrison of 3,400 men laid down their arms with almost no resistance and surrendered. Some vessels of the last convoy, including civilian evacuees, had been sunk by Soviet submarines in the Aniva Gulf. Soviet submarines sank 2 Japanese refugee transport ships Ogasawara Maru and Taito Maru, also damaged Shinko Maru on the 22nd of August. Over 2,400 civilians were killed. Before the war, 420,000 Japanese lived in Karafuto. Although most of the Japanese population was expelled from Sakhalin Island, some chose to stay under Soviet control. In 1989, families were reunited once again with the opening of an international ferry service between Wakkanai and Korsakov. Although this ferry service was discontinued in 2016, there are daily flights between the 2 cities.